Greetings, everyone. Welcome back. We're here at MSP200, Communications and Ethics. We are diving into our ethical debates. Our next topic that we're going to be covering here is obscenity and indecency. On my right side here, we have Zaria and Keith on the pro-for side. Here on my left, we have Ryan and Andrello on the con-against side. Some of the arguments that they're going to focus on today would include the Miller test and the parameters around it, thinking about more censorship, also talking about indecency and the restricted access, talking about or referring to age. So we're going to start off on our right side. All right, our Yes Pro team will have 6 minutes to provide their opening statements and their arguments, and then we'll shift it over to our No Con side, where you will have 3 minutes to ask them any clarifying questions, and we'll go back and forth. All right, here we go, everybody. You're on the clock, Pro team, starting now.
So today we will be defining what is obscene versus what is considered protected by the First Amendment, which is free speech. We are discussing the Miller test. The Miller test's main purpose is to ensure that obscenity is not protected by free speech nor indecency. Obscenity and indecency is in fact not protected by the First Amendment, and that there should be guidelines in which we can use to distinguish free speech from harm for and against obscene speech. The Miller test is a legal test for determining whether expression constitutes obscenity or not. It is named after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in the case Miller versus California. Whether a community deems certain work appropriate, appeals to the Puritan interests, depicts or describes offensive sexual conduct, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. An extremely offensive word or expression is considered obscenity, and indecent acts, gestures, or expression is indecency. There are 5 basic freedoms that are protected within the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of petition or government redress or grievances, and the right to assemble. These are values that America is built on, but not confused with dangers, such as things that are frowned upon by individual communities, the offensive of sexual conduct, also offensive art, such as literary, artistic, political, or scientific work that lacks, in fact, true value, then is just obscene.
To understand the Miller test, we first need to look at the Miller versus California case. In 1971, Mavis Miller, an owner-operator of the California mail business specializing in pornographic films and books, sent out a brochure of advertising books and film that graphically depicted sexual activity between men and women, more like pornographic stuff. The brochure used in the mailing content, it contains graphic images from the books and film. A restaurant owner found it offensive and reported the case. After a few trial and appeal, Miller was found guilty. During the case, one would think that the First Amendment right would have saved Miller, but I can boldly tell you no, it did not save him. In an article written by Tom Hurd, the Miller test is the standard used by court to define obscenity. It comes from the 1973 Supreme Court 5-4 ruling in Miller versus California case, in which Chief Justice Warren Burger, writing for the majority, held that obscene materials are not protected by the First Amendment. The issue of obscenity has always been a problem in society, but due to the Miller test, offensive contents are being restricted by broadcasting outlets. Imagine the absence of the Miller test. Individuals, TV stations, radios, or other broadcasting outlets will take the full advantage and hide under the umbrella of their First Amendment right to broadcast whatever they want to broadcast. Okay, for example, put yourself in the shoe of the restaurant owner, the poor lady who wakes up in the morning, checking in her mail, thinking she's going to meet up with a newspaper, something to brighten her day, and then she came across pornographic stuff. Just imagine that. Imagine your little brother, 8 years old, waking up in the morning, putting the TV on, going to YouTube, trying to look at Coco Miller or something, and then he is presented with like an advert about sexual content, something talking about if you need love, call this number. His first question is going to be, bro, I saw something on the TV. It's talking about love and sex. What is it? you're going to be faced with that question. The Miller tests have contributed to reducing the high rate of minors getting exposed to adult content unknowingly. Indeed, when it comes to obscenity, one can clearly understand that the Miller test should be kept and should be upheld. There should be no changes, it should remain the same, and all the rules and procedures should be followed.
All right. Now we move on to any clarifying questions from the No Con team. You have 3 minutes to ask Keith and Zaria any clarifying questions to their arguments. And you're on the clock starting now.
So for the Miller versus California test, you believe that it was completely unconstitutional that he sent those, that he sent his advertisements out through the mail to consenting adult addresses?
Yeah, first off, it was against the California law. Yeah, it was first against it. So it wasn't like appropriate because not everybody gonna be interested in your content. If somebody requests your content, you're right to send it out to the president. But if I did not request it, you're not right to send it to me. So that was a big problem.
So you do believe that as long as the adult consented to receiving that, it is completely fine. But he is wrong because he sent it out to
a vast number of
just
people.
a vast number of people who didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
But so in all entirety, would it be appropriate to say that that message wasn't intended for an adult to see? Or it wasn't intended for a child to see?
No.
No. So one of the criteria of the Miller test is that, like, the average person should not be offended by your content. So let's say like it's about 1,000 people you send your content out to. Like, I'm answering your question not about a kid. He sent it to either a kid, to an older person, like whatever. Once there is 1%, 0.11 among the crowd that is not in support of it, yeah, you went against the rules already.
So can I follow up with that? Can I ask, how do we generalize the standard person? Because what if what I deem appropriate is not appropriate to someone else? How can we make that generalization?
Especially in such a diverse community that we live in now in the age of 2021 going further into the digital age.
Exactly.
Because as a publisher, you can't just assume who will be opening and receiving your content. It can be sent to that particular address, but that does not mean the person of that address is opening the content.
So can we say that this is a little outdated, considering that the last revision to this test was in 1973? And that we have completely different standards in this current day?
I would say no. I feel the standards of today, the reason why it's been upheld is because the standards of today might be changing on an individual basis, but the Miller test is all about the community and society as a whole, and that must be upheld because the community and society still needs to be protected from obscenity.
All right, that's time. So we're going to move to the Con No team. You have 6 minutes, okay, for your opening statements and arguments, and then you all will have 3 minutes to ask any clarifying questions, and you're on the clock now, starting.
So to clarify to the audience what the Miller test is, a Miller test is a 3-prong test that declares what is obscene and what is not. And these are the 3 prongs. Whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find the work taken as a whole appeals to pure interest. 2, whether the work depicts or describes in patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And 3, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. The Miller test restriction on creative works and expression through broad definition of what obscenity means. Through our improvements to the Miller test, content and work that is simply indecent will be protected, never to be brought into question through someone else's discretion. On the other hand, indecency, particularly on the internet and the modern media side, should call for no restrictions, excessively interfere with the average adult trying to gain access to the content that they're looking for. And it should not be directed or advertised towards minors, but it should also not be restricted in a setting where adults should be in fear that a minor is going to come across this type of content.
Okay, and so we've all heard the saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So the Miller test is obviously broken because as society evolves, standards for what is considered obscene to the general audience will too. The appeal to prurient interest by community standards portion of the test generalizes an audience based upon popular standards. Even in the most conservative communities, there are still people who do possess the same standards as the majority, yet are being restricted to access to material that the government deems obscene. The part of the test is highly outdated and in need of revision, or a new element entirely in order to provide appropriate parameters while not restricting First Amendment rights. And when we talk about what concerns serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, that can be interpreted in a wide variety of ways based upon who is viewing the work. And we strongly believe that the new parameters should be put into place in order to be more fitting for modern times, as well as specific to material that is excessive, vulgar, and harmful in nature. Our new parameters would of course stick to the no exceptions for child pornography, but also clarify no exceptions for content that displays children in an indecent/sexual manner. In addition, instead of sexual content as a whole, new parameters would only identify pornography that directly fetishizes the unlawful/illegal act of sexual abuse and assault to be obscene, as it can be difficult to distinguish real assault. Film, television, and music would be restricted due to violence, sexual nature, and language. Or it would not be restricted due to violence, sexual nature, and language, unless they, of course, have what we identified in the parameters. And since there are parental advisories and explicit content warnings on media as well as music, obviously minors would not be the ones that this media is directed to. All in all, our main argument is to limit the Miller test's restriction on creative works and expression through broad definition of what obscenity means.
Indecent content is all around us as adults, and there's no reason why additional restrictions should be put into place to halt the transmission of indecent material, especially in places on the internet that are no environment for a minor to be browsing. Children can be exposed to awful things on the internet, but with proper parental guidance and limitations, the chances of a child coming into contact with this indecent material is greatly reduced. According to the Canadian Pediatric Society, there are various steps that you can take making your child's online experience a safer one. Measures you can do is gaining access to parental controls, blocking websites that are for adults or unsafe, monitoring activity, and online conversations with peers to make sure indecent content is not being distributed among group chats. We believe that this is something that you take care of in your household with the minor. It's not something that the government should have to take full responsibility for the raising of your children. Because as an adult, you should be able to operate in your setting without worrying about who's going to see it and what's going to see it, because it is in the comfort with your own home. Just like a physical setting, just some places like you won't see a 13-year-old within a bar, you won't see them in a strip club, you won't see them in many places like that because physically they are not able to get in there without identification.
And going back to obscenity, it's pretty much comparable. I mean, as we can see, it's from 1973. The last revision is from 1973. You can imagine how different society is. Not everyone is susceptible to, or not everyone has the same reaction to everything. This is comparable to the Hays Code, which states, "No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin." Now, this is something that dates back to the 30s all the way up until the 1960s, and that was deemed to be outdated for society in the 60s. So there's a trend that we see. Everything needs to be updated to apply to current day standards. And this also entirely limits the ability for filmmakers to put out completely artistic elements of their work. Actress Shelley Winters explains, "I can't believe that in our free society, we now have to decide what adults should and should not see. What is or what is not obscene is certainly the personal opinion of an adult. Among certain communities, it is obscene for a woman to expose her face. In another community, it is obscene for a man to shave his head."
Ryan. All right. You have 3 minutes here to ask any clarifying questions, and you all are on the clock starting now.
All right, so my first question. You was talking about parents being, like, acting like a supervisor to their kids. Like, looking at what they do online.
Yeah.
Do you believe in child privacy?
Do I believe in child privacy? I believe that under 18, that your parents are in full control of what you do.
All right.
And they're responsible. If you get in trouble under the age of a minor, your parents are responsible for you.
So how many parents would take time out of their busy schedule to like be a bodyguard to a kid 24 hours?
I can answer that question in a counter argument.
And I feel like that's just being a good parent. You should be aware of what your child's doing online.
So do you believe that it is not on a community standard to try to keep obscene things from children? It's on an individual basis?
I believe that it shouldn't be their responsibility to keep your child safe, if that makes sense. It's not. It's their chance to. I mean, you're supposed to keep it in parameters, but we aren't throwing it in their faces. We aren't trying to keep it away from the adults that are trying to reach this content. That's the main goal. But we're not trying to put it in the place of a minor. It's not like we're going to put it in a daycare or something like that. It would be in adult environments.
Yep. And yeah. Also, to expand on that, it's just a matter of community standards you can't possibly speak for everyone. And there's certain areas where this material wouldn't be shown, this obscene material wouldn't be shown. But then there's certain areas where we don't want to restrict indecent content to adults that just want to browse that kind of content, because we have to worry about children seeing this content. It ultimately comes down to not everyone having the same community standard. And if we start restricting that as a whole, we're going to end up restricting everything we see in media, everything we see in music.
1 minute. Any other questions?
And that just leads to a whole sheltered community as a whole. Because the things that the Miller test put into place due to its broadness is only causing shells and boundaries that our creatives are trying to break just to make the art that they want, just because a judge who is possibly close to 80, 90 years old is going to judge their artistic value of their work.
Right. Would you...
One final question.
Would you agree that the rights of an individual will not overpower the rights of a community?
Can you repeat the question?
Or clarify it a little more, please?
Does the rights of an individual surpass the importance and well-being of a community standard as stated? What the Miller test is trying to protect?
I certainly do believe individual standards matter, because that's what we are as Americans. We have individual freedoms. We have individual liberty. We should have the opportunity to determine what is our standard, not a community standard as a whole. Because if I'm in a really conservative neighborhood, really conservative area, and they deem that material to be too obscene for me to see, that's restricting on my First Amendment rights. That's restricting on my freedom.
As long as it's not
All right,
violent and
that's
gruesome.
time. All right. So here we go to the rebuttal. No new arguments are presented here. Rebuttal/counter argument. All right. So we're going to start with the Yes Pro team. You'll have 3 minutes. All right. And you're on the clock starting now.
Counter argument. The Miller test does need to be updated in a sense. In a way, people will say it's not effective, but it has stood for multiple years and is trying to keep obscenity and indecency from children and also adults. So this also takes power from the individual and places it into the community, which goes against our individual free speech and right to expression. That is very much understood, but as I stated before, I do believe that the community as a whole has just as much value as individual expression or just need. It's just for the community in general is just a larger aspect than the individual. The community could be hundreds of thousands of people, where an individual is just literally an individual.
So in addition to what she said, you guys will claim that the Miller test is being strict, and then there needs to be few changes and all that stuff. So take into consideration, we already like battling an epidemic, internet damaging epidemic. The internet is causing more harm than good. So the Miller test being put in place has been a help to like stop more harms from like being caused. So if we put it on the table, okay, let's restrict it. Oh, let's look into it. Let's bring another laws. Let's bring another rules. We're gonna be causing more harm than what we have already caused or what have already happened.
All set with the counter?
Yeah.
All right. So we're moving here to the no con team. You have 3 minutes for your counter argument, and you're on the clock starting now.
So what you just said, you said that we wanted to make the Miller test more. We didn't. You said that the Miller test. Excuse me. You said that we said that the Miller test was too strict. That is actually the opposite of what we said. We said that it's too broad, and we would like to narrow it down to more directly on what it should be for, and that's making sure that children aren't seen in obscene ways, and that they aren't even getting. They aren't in the environment of the content that we would like to put out. And you also were talking about how parents having, how many parents have the time out of their day to be able to monitor their child's internet use. But although that you do have that disagreement, there is a research according to Pew Research that more than 60% of parents of children between the ages of 13 to 17 have checked the websites they visited, as well as their calls and texts. And that's more than half of the parents that took part in that survey. So if they have the time to be able to check it, then they have the time to be able to parent and discipline their children on what is obscene and what is indecent and what they shouldn't be looking at in their free time, and how they should act in the digital realm, because they have, as you can see, they are looking at their phones and looking at the content that they're looking at, so they should be able to observe that.
Exactly, and directly applying to that, you mentioned this internet epidemic that applies to obscene content, but the internet epidemic can, first of all, as Drello said, it could easily be prevented. If you don't want minors going on the internet, there are many things you can do as a parent. There are many restrictions you can take, and if everyone took these measures and set up restrictions on their child's device, even gave them kid-friendly alternatives to social media to browse instead of going on Facebook and everything, and Facebook, Instagram, where they can be exposed to indecent content, it would make a great difference in how many kids are exposed to this indecent content as a whole, because it all comes down to being good parents. And if you say that kids are going to go see it from another friend, the other friend doesn't have good parenting at his house. So it starts with the household. It starts with restricting access to what you don't want your child to see. And yeah, so this internet epidemic should not even be a thing for children. Children should not be on these sites like Instagram or even like Tinder. There's been restrictions put into place for websites. Yep, for websites such as OnlyFans, primarily based around pornography. There has been an identification process to which you have to directly identify yourself as an adult before you get on that website.
All right, that's time. All right, so now we move to our conclusion, where you all will state why you felt your argument was the best. You each have 3 minutes. Let's start with the pro team here, and you're on the clock starting now.
So in conclusion, we do believe that the Miller test should be upheld and kept the way it is. I think that it's a step in the right motion. It is to protect not only children but adults from themselves. Obscenity has no place in a healthy lifestyle, neither does indecency. The Miller test is in fact what helps that to be concrete, and people need to be protected from indecency and obscenity, even when that might in fact infringe on the First Amendment or an artist's artistic license to create. In many cases, as we discussed during the debate, explain exactly why. The protection of our children and our minds come first before the lack of necessity of obscene and indecent content. A world that is not filled with indecent and obscene content is a better world. We should not fight for the rights of individuals when the greater good is at stake, and when there is the whole to focus on. We can't focus on pieces. Children do have access to the internet. Children do access social media platforms. Children are being exploited, and if we're here to save children, then that's what we need to do. And I feel like the step in the right place would be within the Miller's test, and to keep that because it's here for a reason. Just like the guy that opened up a brochure and thought it was something about his restaurant, he's seen obscene content, and as Keith stated before, that could have been his child who opened that letter instead of him. So in conclusion, we do believe that the Miller test should be kept and upheld.
All right, we have the no team, 3 minutes for your conclusion, and you're on the clock starting now.
Okay, before we get started with a debate or a conclusion that we read, I just want to take a look at the audience real quick and ask you, how would it feel to wake up every day and have to worry about content being restricted because it's not up to par with the community you live in? It's not deemed to be interesting, artistic, or serious. Yep. The standards are so broad and so outdated that there needs to be a proper parameter put into place in order to just at least revise this to apply to our modern day and age. Like I said before, the main thing we're trying to focus on, Zaria mentioned it, but we are trying to focus on the protection of minors, but that can be done in ways that we don't need to restrict access to indecent material to, say, someone who wants to browse that in the first place, an adult that wants to browse that, which is the directed audience in terms of movie, music, and everything. We don't want to restrict that, and the parameters that we'll put into place specifically target in minors being engaged in sexual or prurient acts directly, and of course there's no exceptions for child pornography or fetishes that glorify this kind of sexual abuse and behavior along the lines of that.
Or sexual abuse at all. We don't believe that there's certain content that should not be out into the public at all because it is wrong and it is already previously illegal. And there's already restrictions, like on music, there's explicit markings, there's rated TVMA, and there's rated R that give you the parental discretion to see if you want your kid to see this, then you can let them sit there. But if not, you should take this off the screen and you should turn this off. Our argument is better, I believe, because we are protecting the freedoms of law-abiding adults and the content that they would like to view or create. I'm an artist myself. I do not want to put out a song and then be scared of going to a federal court because I'm talking about sexual acts between two consenting adults, or a story that I'm telling about something here or something that happened there, just because it's not appealing to the judge who will be judging me, who is 75 years old and can't understand that the community that I live in is maybe this is what they want to hear. This is something that someone can relate to who is also an adult just like me, who should have access to this content. I believe it's just common sense, because why would I not be able, under the First Amendment right, to have my freedom of speech and be able to put out what I want, but not direct it towards minors? If it's already not directed towards minors and it's already has the restrictions in place to be put out of their way, why do I need more restrictions to keep it out of their way?
That's time. All right, everybody, let's give it up for both teams here. Now we're going to head into our question and answer session. First, we're going to start with questions from the audience. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Come on up to the mic, ask your question. We'll have 15 minutes. Either team can respond. And we're on the clock starting now. Go ahead, Ethan.
All right, so the first is kind of a three-part question, so sorry to put you on the spot. I guess first off, great job, everybody. So
Thank
for
you.
Zaria and Keith, Why shouldn't viewers have access to whatever content they want, even if obscene? Shouldn't parents be responsible for monitoring their kids' behavior anyway, since the kids can easily find online porn, which is much more obscene than what would likely be shown in most applications of the Miller test? Do people need to be protected from themselves, or do they have the right to make decisions that may harm them, such as an example of drinking alcohol, which could lead you to harm yourself or others?
I do believe people should be protected from themselves. As we all know, as growing young adults, sometimes we make bad decisions, and sure, those do lead to our development path, but that doesn't mean you don't have to fall, you don't have to trip to know you might fall. And just speaking on obscenity, we have to make sure we're talking about adults, and children will gain access to things regardless if, it's under what their parents can try to hide from them. A child is going to seek what a child will seek, and it is the government's job to try to protect that child where the parent might fail. So that's what the Miller test is really trying to do. It's trying to give an extra help to parents and also individuals, like you said, harming themselves. I don't believe that people should be entitled to obscenity.
All right. So in addition to what she said, people should be protected from themselves. Like, especially for kids. Kids get easily influenced. Like, what they see is what they try or what they do. Look at the case of an active shooter. When an active shooter is being broadcasted, like getting all the hype, getting all the fans, like that he has gotten from what he did, it serves like a motivation to like a kid coming up, looking at somebody on the phone. Oh, this guy got millions of views, and then he committed a shooting. Oh, I'm doing mine too, because I want to get this hype he got. So yeah, people should be protected from themselves.
Okay. And then for Ryan and Drella, while the applications for the Miller test may be different today, should today's families be subjected to pornographic material or other obscene content in the mail?
They shouldn't be subjected to it, no, but I do agree with what they said, as he was wrong because he sent it out to a vast number of homes, and that is something that you should not send to every single household. But if you have a mail list and you have a selection of people who do want this content or who do want notifications and updates and stuff like that, then why should that be illegal and be just because someone says that the content that person created isn't correct or isn't right due to community standards, that those consenting adults that sign that paper cannot receive that content in the mail? So,
for example, porn then would be okay if the person wanted it?
If the person wanted it, yeah.
Okay. It's all up to them. It's their that's their freedom as an American.
And into addition, with mail, it should only be opened by the person. It is illegal to open someone else's mail. Exactly. You have, like, if that mail has your name on it, you are the person that is supposed to open it. So a child should not even have access to be able to open it. That's like the parent would give that freedom away if that mail was to be opened by them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and then should adults be allowed to view or create whatever they want in terms of like a video or like for you music, if there is an audience that wants to see it, even if it's like really obscene?
Yes, of course. As long as it has nothing to do with minors or the abuse of minors or the abuse of anyone in a sense of promoting it. That should not be able to be put out, but I should be able, and every other artist should be able to create the content that they want, because that is the way that they make their living and that's the way that they make their art.
Yep.
All right, thank you guys. Great answers, everybody, and great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Come on up, Melissa.
Yeah, I just agree with Ethan. Everybody's doing a great job. So I have a question for both sides, for Keith and Zaria. And just, forgive me if you already kind of went over this, but like, how do you define what is good for a community or community standards in an extremely diverse country that encourages expressions of individuals and adults?
Well, I think we can start with what is since natural to our daily lives. I think that's where you begin to even describe what is obscene. So if something is working against like what is normal, I think then that's where that then starts. If I'm kind of answering your question, could you repeat it one more time for me?
Yeah, no problem. So essentially, like, what I'm saying is, how do you define, like, what community standards are, because that's part of the Miller test, 3 prongs, like, what's correct with community standards. Forgive me, I'm not saying correctly. Like, how do you define what community standards should be upheld? What community are they speaking of? Do you feel like, or do you feel like that should be an improvement, or what do you feel like? I just feel like it's so vague.
I do agree with you. I think that is vague because communities differ from where you are. But if we're talking about, like, let's say it's a community and this is a Christian community, you know, you live within this Christian community and, you know, you want to base everything off of respect where, let's say, one person wants to post or put posters up of like satanic things, and this is a Christian community. I don't think that the right of that Satanist has more power over the Christian community of itself, especially if the Christian community is a larger number than the individuals like Satanist.
Okay, so basically, yeah, it does help actually. So kind of what you're saying is that it goes based off each individual community, then standards should go to that.
Right.
Great, thank you very much. I apprate it.
I'd like to add on top of that is.
Wait, the only questions from Melissa here.
I'd like to add on.
You can add in
Okay.
if you want to answer that question as well.
I'd like to add on top of that because what we live in, we do not live in a communist society where we all have to abide by the same one law just because of the community that we live in. We can be individuals within the community that we live in. Just because I'm a black man in a suburban area does not mean that I have to believe on everything that is going on that my neighbors believe in. Just because I may be the only black person in my neighborhood, that doesn't mean I have to abide by the community standards that everybody in my neighborhood coincides by, because I grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia and I moved out here to get a better life. But that doesn't mean that I have to just change myself and change what I like and change who I am because all of my neighbors down the road like country, pop, and hard rock, and then I'd like to listen to hip hop, and that means I'm not allowed to listen to hip hop just because it's not within my community standard. And with what is normal is like what is obscene, we as a human society, we used to be like cavemen and walk around naked and do other things. Like times change and everything evolves. So I believe you can't just set one thing to a community standard.
I appreciate that, and I agree. And I think more so, I was kind of going based off one of the comments that I forget if it was yourself or Ryan mentioned, where it was like in some like Muslim countries, it's okay to like show, you know, there's things that are okay in a Muslim country, things that aren't okay, but like, by what standard does everyone go by? And I understand, I'm not saying take away the rights of the individual. I'm just saying for obscenity and indecency media laws.
Exactly.
You had another question?
Yeah, real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just so another question for the con team. Okay, I understand that you guys are going, you're saying like the media should not be regulated by the government, or it should be, the law should be changed, the Miller law should be changed. But my question to you is, a lot of what you stated is that it should be on the parents. The parents should be the ones to guide, you know, the children. But what about the 2.5 million children in America that are homeless? What about the people that don't have parental guidance? You know, who's going to protect them from indecency and obscenity in the media? That's my question to you guys. What would you suggest?
With all due respect, most of those kids are, if they're homeless, the media isn't necessarily the main. That isn't what they like. That's not the worry of their needs. You know what I mean? It's mostly as like we're talking like our argument is for kids in a household who have or are able to contact, who have cell phones, who have their cell phone plans, who are able, like they're eating every day, they're watching television. Your question, I'd be like, I feel like pertains to children who don't really have access to that type of, like that's not something
potentially
worry that we would have to.
Okay, yeah, and I was just saying, like, or like, say for broken homes, children from broken homes that don't have parental guidance, like, do you feel like, you know, kind of the Miller test doesn't apply to like to them? Well, I'm not wording myself properly, but like, what do you feel like? What kind of guidance if they don't have parental figures in there and the Miller test isn't working and it needs to be updated? What do you feel should be their options, or what are their options?
Then there's schools. I feel like there's always a figure in your life somewhere out there who is going to be able to tell you what is right and what is wrong for you. And then as a growing child or a minor, you are learning yourself what is right and wrong for you. And that is all about survival in the world, because without that, you're a walking vegetable. You have to be able to make the right and wrong for yourself.
Can I also answer
Yeah, go ahead.
that? So I think that you brought up a very interesting point, and it's very inclusive because not every child grows up in a fully functioning home with
That was a great question,
media.
You guys are doing great.
But as we stated before in class, that it's inescapable, as people had to explain to me that social media and media itself is inescapable. So that's why the Miller test is so important, because that's going to hit the areas that we cannot control within a household. It's going to hit the areas of a government standard. So as long as you're here in America, then you will have to abide by at least these rules, and you're at least protected by this, rather than saying, well, my mom said I can do whatever I want, so it doesn't matter. Sure, that's cool for the individual, but those then kind of other children, they will at least have someone, when they look up at a poster, that poster will be fed through a system that will not allow them to see obscenity, that will not allow them to see posters as they walk around that is obscene. So I think that was a great question.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Thanks,
Does anyone
guys.
else in the audience want to ask one more question?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't think
All right.
about it.
Soraya, so you were saying that, like, for example, with the Satanist and the Christian community, that the Satanists wouldn't be allowed to express Satanistic desires. So, like, I guess, how would that be implemented? Like, would you have local governments? Like, for example, like, if you live in a city, would that be, like, the mayor and the city council? Or, like, would that be, like, for PA, would that be, say, Philadelphia as an example, and if Philly was that example, then would the mayor of Philly do that? Would it be the governor of PA and the state legislators of PA, or how would that be implemented?
I think that is also a good question. I do believe that the majority, that Christian majority has as much right. Well, since it's more numbers, I feel as though, me personally, that they have more entitlement to what they should be able to see in their community. The individual that is the Satanist, I don't believe that individual is wrong for posting that content. I do just think the content itself is obscene if the majority deems it so. But the Miller test would give that community, that majority, the chance to fight that in court.
So would you then say, like, it's a neighborhood, you would then give the neighborhood the chance, if, like, say 55% of the neighborhood doesn't want that, you would say that would be enough to get it taken down? Or would it have to be a higher percentage to show, like, the neighborhood, like, itself support, like, say, like 60-70% to show it's, like, widespread support? Or how would that work?
I would definitely just say majority rules.
Yeah.
And if you are an individual, it doesn't take the right from you. No one's telling you to change your beliefs. No one's telling you to change your artistic value. But maybe you should join your community and do that in your community. And then maybe your community won't then deem that obscene, but you can't go to someone else's community with what they would deem obscene and then, expect something different.
Okay, thank you.
I just
Can
don't
I
think
add to
that.
that?
Okay.
Sure.
I was just gonna say, so what if that is my community though? And
Like, I
what
was
if,
born and raised there.
yeah, and what if I don't deem the material obscene? I know other people who don't deem the material obscene, but there's just that majority that deems it to be obscene. Then how can we judge that? Like, isn't that in a way infringing upon our freedom of expression, our general freedoms as an American?
Exactly.
I do agree with that, but
So you're answering Ethan's question. I asked him a question, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that would,
Well,
yeah.
to basically
We can- yeah.
to add on to what she said on the answer to your question of who would be the judge of that and how it would be judged, I feel like it shouldn't be, because if I was born and raised in this community, and just because I'm an outlier of what I believe in or what I like and what I deserve, why does the neighborhood watch or the neighborhood councilman or the mayor or whoever is in charge of that community is to tell me that I'm wrong and I'm obscene for expressing myself in a way that I would like to, that is law abiding, but still, like, not of standards to the majority of my community. Just like I said earlier, as being a black person moving from a area that's not mine to here, I'm still keeping I still would like to keep myself as an American person. I have the freedom to keep my likes and dislikes and being able to express them in law-abiding ways without fear of judgment.
And also, one more thing about obscenity is that in order to deem something obscene, the Supreme Court, who deemed it obscene, like the laws for obscenity, they ruled, like, they agreed. I think it was 5 out of the however many justices were in there. It was the majority of the justices. But they deemed it to be, like, they can classify obscenity without showing that it poses a direct harm to the community. So without posing a direct harm to the community, that's basically saying that the Supreme Court or whoever deems these rules to be obscene, they can take anything and deem that inappropriate for society.
And that's time, Ryan. Let's give it up one time for both groups. Wonderful job today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us to our debates. We're still continuing all week with our next few debates. We have a virtual debate tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Don't forget. And then we'll be back here in the studio at 2 o'clock on Thursday. Thanks again. Let's give it up one more time. Woo, 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 woo. Thank you to our production teams today and everybody that participated.